Right now, as you are watching this, the largest single climate signal on the planet is quietly reorganizing itself. And forecasters at NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, the World Meteorological Organization, and every major national weather service on Earth have just told the public what is about to happen. On August 8, 2026, NOAA issued a formal La Niña Advisory. The tropical Pacific Ocean, the vast basin whose surface temperatures set the tempo for weather patterns across virtually every continent, has crossed the threshold into an established La Niña state, and forecasters now project the event will strengthen through the autumn and persist through the entire winter of 2026 into 2027. The Bureau of Meteorology in Australia has issued a matching declaration. Colorado State University's Tropical Weather Group flagged it in their August hurricane update as a critical amplifier of an already record tracking Atlantic season. Weather services across South America, Africa, and Asia are all now working from the same underlying pattern. This is the huge shift. Not a storm arriving next week, not a heat wave next month, a reorganization of ocean and atmospheres that will bend the weather in 100 places at once for the next 6 to 9 months, and in some regions longer. Some of those bends mean drought, some mean floods, some mean stronger hurricanes and typhoons, some mean colder or warmer winters than the recent normal. And every one of these effects is knowable in advance, because the physics of El Niño and La Niña, the two phases of the phenomenon called ENSO, the El Niño Southern Oscillation, is the best understood, best forecast climate signal in the science. Today we break down exactly what La Niña is at the physical level and why one ocean can rewrite weather worldwide. Exactly what forecasters are projecting for the regions where this shift matters most, from the American Southwest and Gulf Coast to East Africa and Southeast Asia. The contrast that shows what happens when a society acts on this forecast versus ignores it, and what you should actually do in the 6 months ahead, depending on where you live. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the climate science, the forecasts, and the real stakes for the billions of people whose weather is about to change. Drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? Because this video's answer to what does this shift mean for me depends entirely on your location, and I want the comment section to become a live map of ENSO impacts. If you have lived through a strong La Niña before the winter of 2010, 2011, the extended triple dip event of 2022, 2023, tell me your country and what you remember. And here's a second question for everyone. Had you ever heard the phrase El Niño or La Niño before, and did you know what it actually meant? Because the gap between the term's familiarity and its actual meaning is one of the largest in all of climate communication. Subscribe right now if you want every major weather shift, forecast update, and climate driver story covered, as it happens, completely free. A thumbs up helps us reach the people whose next 6 months are about to be shaped by exactly what this video describes. Let us go for 6,000 likes. Now let us go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, because that is where this entire story begins. To understand La Niña, you have to understand what the tropical Pacific normally does. Along the equator, powerful trade winds blow steadily from east to west, from South America toward Indonesia, pushing the surface waters of the ocean westward as they go. Warm water piles up in the western Pacific, around Indonesia and the Philippines, where sea levels are actually several tens of centimeters higher than off the coast of Peru. Because of this constant push, in the eastern Pacific, cold water is pulled up from the deep ocean to replace what the winds have moved away, a process called upwelling, which is why the coasts of Peru and Ecuador are famously productive fishing grounds and unexpectedly cool. For the latitude, that warm water pile in the western Pacific fuels the atmosphere above it. Warm ocean means intense evaporation, which means towering thunderstorms, which means the rising branch of a vast atmospheric circulation cell called the Walker circulation, named for the British scientist Sir Gilbert Walker, who first mapped it a century ago. Air rises over Indonesia, flows eastward at high altitude, sinks over the cool eastern Pacific, and returns westward at the surface as the trade winds themselves. It is a giant, self-sustaining loop, and its shape determines rainfall patterns, jet stream positions, and storm tracks across enormous parts of the globe. El Niño is what happens when this loop weakens or breaks down. The trade winds slacken, warm water sloshes back eastward, the eastern Pacific warms, the entire Walker circulation shifts, rainfall that normally falls on Indonesia migrates to the central Pacific. The North American jet stream is pushed south. Drought hits Australia. The Atlantic hurricane season quiets. That is one phase. La Niña is the opposite, and it is what we are entering now. The trade winds strengthen beyond normal. The warm water pile in the west becomes deeper and warmer. Eastern Pacific upwelling intensifies. Cooling the equator further, the Walker circulation supercharges, and the weather patterns everywhere it touches lean, sometimes hard, into the opposite direction of an El Niño year. That is why La Niña is not just cold or Pacific. It is a reorganization of the atmospheric machinery with specific, predictable consequences in specific places. Here is the map of those consequences for the winter and spring ahead as the world's forecast agencies are currently projecting it. The American Southwest and the Gulf Coast are heading into a drier than normal winter. La Niña winters push the North American storm track north, starving the Southwest of the Pacific storms that fill its reservoirs. Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas historically see below-average precipitation in La Niña years, in a region already carrying long-term drought stress in its major river systems, the Colorado. The Rio Grande, a strong La Niña this winter deepens the challenge for water managers who plan reservoir releases a year in advance. The Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies, by contrast, typically see enhanced precipitation and cooler winters. Under La Niña, good news for snowpack, meaning stronger spring runoff for the Columbia system and healthier wildfire seasons the following summer. Along the Gulf Coast and the Southeast, La Niña winters tend toward warmer and drier, but the more consequential effect has already been in play for months. La Niña reduces wind shear over the Atlantic, which is exactly why the 2026 hurricane season is running near record levels. As we covered in our Atlantic hurricane cycle video, South America splits sharply. Northern South America, Colombia, Venezuela, northern Brazil, the Guianas tend toward wetter conditions and higher flood risk in La Niña years, and the Amazon basin generally sees enhanced rainfall. Southern Brazil, Uruguay, and central Argentina, however, tend the opposite way toward drought, with direct implications for one of the world's most important agricultural belts. The soy, corn, and wheat harvests of the southern cone are highly La Niña sensitive, and the 2022 triple dip La Niña carved billions of dollars from Argentina's harvest in exactly this pattern. Global commodity markets are already pricing it in. The Horn of Africa carries the most humanitarian stakes. La Niña shifts the short rain season across Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya toward failure. The 2020-2023 event drove that region into the worst multi-season drought in 40 years, pushing over 20 million people into acute food insecurity and destroying tens of millions of livestock. A single strong La Niña winter, now, on top of only partial recovery from the last, is precisely what UN and regional humanitarian agencies are gaming out this month. The maritime continent and northern Australia are the mirror image, the winners in a La Niña in some senses, and the losers in others. Rainfall over Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and northern Australia tends to increase substantially, refilling reservoirs and boosting agriculture. But it also raises flood and landslide risk in vulnerable areas, and it can shift and intensify the tropical cyclone tracks. The Philippines, in particular, sees more western Pacific typhoons taking tracks that carry them into Luzon and the Visayas in La Niña years, a pattern the country's disaster agencies plan around every cycle. South and East Asia see effects too. The Indian summer monsoon tends slightly stronger in La Niña years, generally favorable for South Asian agriculture, though a strong or shifted La Niña can push it toward flood extremes. Northeast Asia, northern China, Korea, Japan tends toward colder winters, with impacts on heating demand and grid stress. That is a lot of geography, and the point is precisely that. This is a single ocean pattern, one system, one signal that reorganizes the weather of 6 continents at once in ways that were mostly unknown to science a century ago and are now forecast with genuine confidence months in advance. Which brings us to the contrast case at the heart of this video, because a forecast is only as valuable as what a society does with it. And history has run this experiment for us in the clearest possible way. The winter of 2015-2016 was the peak of one of the strongest El Niños on record. In California, the state had entered a 5th consecutive year of severe drought. Reservoirs were critically low. In the seasonal outlook, driven by El Niño's predictable enhancement of Pacific storms, projected a very wet winter for the state. California's response was systematic. Water managers pre-lowered reservoirs to make room for expected inflows. Coordinated releases across agencies, updated flood control operations, and communicated to the public that a wet winter was coming and preparation, not celebration, was required. The winter delivered close to expectation. Reservoirs filled without catastrophic flooding, and the state exited the driest phase of the drought. It was not a perfect response. Northern California received more benefit than the South, but the forecast was heated. The infrastructure moved, and the outcome was manageable. Compare that to Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya through 2020 to 2022. As the triple dip La Niña deepened, seasonal forecasts issued by regional and international agencies were unambiguous. The short rains would fail. Again and again, the forecasts arrived months ahead, in some cases years ahead. What did not arrive at scale was the anticipatory financing, the kind of early cash and asset support to pastoralists. Families that lets them destock herds before drought kills them, or that pre-positions food and water before conditions collapse. The international humanitarian system remained largely reactive rather than anticipatory. Money flowed after the crisis was visible in television footage, months after the forecasts had told everyone what was coming. The result was catastrophic: livestock deaths in the tens of millions, food insecurity for over 20 million people, preventable mortality that a properly funded anticipatory response tied to the ENSO forecast could have significantly reduced. Post-crisis reviews by every major aid agency reached the same conclusion. The forecast worked. The system built to act on it did not. Two responses to the same category of climate signal. One country pre-lowered reservoirs. Another humanitarian system waited for hunger to arrive on camera. The forecast is not the intervention. What people do with the forecast is, let us be direct about the practical message. What you actually do next depends on where you live. If you are in the American Southwest, assume a drier than average winter. Plan household water use accordingly, and pay attention to your local utilities' messaging on reservoir levels and outdoor waterings, the water year that begins. This October is likely to be lean, and household conservation aggregated across millions of accounts genuinely matters at the reservoir scale. If you are in the Pacific Northwest or Northern Rockies, expect a wetter, cooler winter with strong snowpack potential, which is good news for water supply and for the next summer's fire season. But stay alert to flooding on saturated ground and to enhanced avalanche conditions in the mountains. If you are in the Gulf Coast or Southeast, the Atlantic hurricane season we have already covered runs through November, and La Niña is the reason it is running as strong as it is. Do not draw down your hurricane preparedness this month. The highest risk weeks are ahead. If you are in southern Brazil, Uruguay, or Argentina, drought stress on the coming agricultural cycle is a known risk, and if your work touches agriculture, water, or livestock, the pattern rewards early water and forage planning. If you are in northern Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, or Malaysia, expect an above-average wet season and typhoon vigilance, with the specific caution that a wetter season also means elevated flood and landslide risk in vulnerable terrain. If you're in the Horn of Africa, or if you support humanitarian work in that region, this is the season to push for and fund anticipatory action rather than reactive response. The forecast is not a surprise. Waiting is a choice. And for everyone, wherever you are, understand that the phrase climate signal is not abstract. It is the specific reason your winter, your growing season, your reservoir, and possibly your grocery prices are about to move in a particular direction. This is the moment forecasts translate into decisions. Final thought. The tropical Pacific is a vast, warm, quiet expanse of ocean that most people who watch this video will never see. And yet the temperature at its surface, a variable measured to hundredths of a degree by satellites and moored buoys, is right now setting the trajectory of drought in Kenya, hurricane strength in the Caribbean, snowpack in the Sierra, harvest yields in Argentina, and typhoons in the Philippines. For the next 9 months, that is the kind of connected planet we live on, and the kind of climate signal that global science has finally learned to read months in advance. The huge weather shift in the title of this video is real. It is not a single event. It is a pattern, La Niña, established, strengthening, projected, that will change everything in the sense that it will subtly or dramatically bend the weather in every place its influence reaches. In some of those places, that means milder consequences. In others, life and death ones. The science has done its part. The forecast is out. And what the next 6 months look like now depends on the choices being made this week. In reservoirs, in ports, in commodity trading floors, in humanitarian budgets, by the people who read the forecast and decide whether to act on it. Look at your weather this fall. Look at your reservoir levels this winter. Look at your grocery bill this spring. All of it will carry the fingerprint of one ocean, half a world away. We will track every ENSO update, every regional impact, and every major weather development across this event as it unfolds. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and leave that comment. Your country, your climate, and what you remember from past La Niña years, because 6 continents worth of first-hand weather is exactly the map this story deserves. 6,000 likes. Let us go.